Welcome, everybody, to Mom Street USA. My name is Jackie, aka Wishes Mama, and I am joined for this hub episode of Mom Street by my good friend Stevie, aka Starship Stevie. And today we are going to be discussing something that is very near and dear to Stevie's heart, and that is food allergies at the Disney parks. She says reluctantly as she agrees that it's near and dear to her heart.
I don't know that it's dear to my heart, but it is very near
Yeah.
to my heart.
Yes, so Stevie's got a ton of experience with this, and I will let her get into that here in a moment. But that is the plan for today. So if you are someone that is going to the parks and you yourself have allergies or dietary needs, or you're traveling with a kiddo or a family member that needs that, hopefully this information is super helpful. So that way you're prepped a little bit ahead of time before you go down. So I will let Stevie kind of jump in here and we'll hop back and forth with some good info and then share some experiences as well. So, Stevie, what do you have for us to start?
So to start, to preface all of this, one of the main reasons why I love going to Disney so much is because I have a lot of food allergies and digestive disorders, and it is just so reliable at Disney for me to be able to find what I need to eat. When I go travel someplace else, there's just so much research involved to try to figure out like where I can eat, how much of that can I eat, do other people in my party want to eat there, is where I can eat actually close to any place that we're going to be, and it just becomes like a whole thing and it's hard to relax. Sometimes it's still fun and it's fine, especially if it's like a major city and they've got lots of like chain restaurants that I know that I can eat at, but it's just really nice to be able to let my guard down at Disney because they've got a routine and it's pretty consistent. And I appreciate that so much from for being at Disney.
Yeah, Disney has done a lot of work and they kind of have been the leaders in this realm. I feel like from a lot of theme parks and tourist places and things that you might visit if you're going on a vacation. I think Disney is out in front when it comes to how they treat allergies, dietary needs and restrictions, all of that. So that totally makes sense.
Absolutely. And for context, I just so you have an awareness of the types of allergies that I bring because allergies run a wide spectrum for different people. And so I do not have an allergy so severe that I need to carry an EpiPen. I have some non-lethal food allergies and I have two digestive disorders. I am lactose intolerant and I have fructose malabsorption. That is basically a lot like lactose intolerance. I have trouble digesting foods that include fructose. Fructose naturally occurs in everything from honey to wheat to apples. And so it can be very difficult to find food that has low to no fructose. I've also been a vegetarian since I was in elementary school just because I don't like the taste of meat. And so all of that can really make it difficult to find something that I can eat. Honestly, a lot of times when I'm meeting somebody for the first time or we're going out and, I'm meeting coworkers or wherever, and I try to explain and I'm like, you know what? It's a lot easier to explain what I can eat rather than what I can't eat because that list is so long.
Yeah, and I've known Stevie since pre-diagnosis from a lot of this stuff, so I feel like I have learned along with her what she can eat to an extent because we've lived together and we've just been around each other enough that it's like when I try to explain to other people your dietary needs, it's like, well, here are like the 4 safe foods that I know she can have.
Some things are so reliable with how they're made, like it's predictable, and I know that this is probably fine and it's safe, and it was a big learning curve, and I think that if anybody is familiar with lactose intolerance, you'll know that some people can tolerate, like, cheese, especially, like, hard cheese, like Parmesan, but they can't do ice cream, and so it's kind of a learning process to determine, like, what you can and can't handle, and fructose malabsorption works a lot like the same way, and it's nice being at Disney because it's predictable, and that means that I'm less stressed about figuring out what I can do.
Yes, for sure. Do keep in mind, kind of as we go through, because we're going to jump into some kind of policies and procedures and experiences with allergies. But please keep in mind that if you are someone listening, you know your allergy and dietary needs best, right? If it's you, if it's someone in your travel party, you guys know best what will work for you. Disney is great, like we said; they are phenomenal with all of this, but they're still not perfect, right? The only place that you can probably find a perfectly safe meal if you've got a severe allergy is your own kitchen to an extent. So just remember that as you're going. They are still very large commercial kitchens that they have. They just don't have the means to have it be completely safe of all allergens. It's just not possible for them to do that. And do also note that, again, this is probably a given for anybody who's got severe allergies, but if you have a severe allergy, please have a plan in place, right? You have to make sure that you are aware. When I was reading and doing just a little bit of kind of reading and research for this, I came across a couple of different blogs of like moms who had taken toddlers that had severe nut allergies or peanut allergies, and it was things as simple as someone in line having a peanut and then touching the rail, and you have to make sure that your kiddo doesn't touch the rail if they've got a severe allergy to that. So just planning ahead, making sure you have any medications you need, whether that be an EpiPen or there's various different types of those that exist out in the world.
Or
And
Clorox wipes to wipe things
yes.
down before you do things, all
Yes,
kinds of
hand sanitizer to make sure that you can, in a pinch, get that off mostly until you can go, wash your hands in the restroom or whatever it may be with that. Um, just in case you happen to unexpectedly come into contact with something, right? It can happen in lines, it can happen walking down the walkways. It doesn't just have to be in the food locations that you may come into contact with something like that. And also, just a note, nothing that we say here is medical advice. This is just our opinion and our experience. Please make sure you make a plan with your medical provider if you're concerned about allergies before you go to the parks. Talk to them, talk through some good plans and courses of action if you need it. All of that, legal stuff. Make sure you're staying safe. Talk to your doctor first. Don't just take our word as the ultimate word, please.
Yes, these are basic tips for navigating your way through finding answers and once you're actually there, who to talk to, what you can expect, rather than managing your individual diet.
Exactly. Yes. So let's jump into some just basics of eating with allergies at Disney.
So, all of that being said, ingredients are always available to read upon request. I think that at a lot of places, in my experience at least, there are some restaurants that find that their ingredients are proprietary information and they don't want to share their secrets necessarily. And so they may give you a general idea of what's in a food or tell you that it doesn't have a certain major ingredient, but they're not necessarily going to provide you a full, thorough list of what is actually in the food that you're eating. And I understand that, but it is frustrating, and it usually means that I can't eat somewhere if I can't know what's in the food. So
Right.
I love that about Disney. They have uh, ingredients always available to read. And for allergy requests that include the 9 major allergens, so like the common or basic allergens, nearly all of the Disney menus have things listed if you scroll down to the bottom of either the My Disney Experience app or the Disneyland app, or by visiting the website and taking a look at the menus. And so, just as a refresher, those major allergens include eggs, fish, milk, peanuts, sesame, shellfish, soy, tree nuts, and wheat. And that's quite the tongue twister. But it is nice that right off the bat, you do have some basics that you can look up on your own without having to talk to anybody at all.
Yeah, so if you know you're going to be visiting a certain location or you anticipate a few different ones you may visit throughout your time there, definitely take a look at that. It's super easy to find on either the apps. If you just search the name of the restaurant, you're going to find the menu, and it's typically towards the bottom, right? So it'll list the standard menu, and then down underneath where it lists like all the extra desserts and beverages, then that's typically where you'll find them start to list out the allergy friendly menu. So also when you are visiting Disney, there's also the ability to discuss any additional accommodations that you need beforehand. So if you visit the Disney website, you can find all this information. But basically, if you or anyone in your party has 4 or more allergy requests, so if you're someone that's got several needs based on that list, or not even just on that list, but outside of that list, or needs a special accommodation such as a medically restrictive diet or requiring requiring, there we go, purees or very low protein or whatever it may be, you can contact special.diets@disneyworld.com. They have an email address for Disney World. Disneyland has a phone number that you can call, and I'm not going to list off the phone numbers. Look those up on the website. They are very easy to find. It took me 3 seconds to Google them and find them. But you can actually reach out to them in advance. So that way you can ask for a special diets request form. So they'll be able to help you out with kind of the process for that if you've got additional or kind of excessive, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but just more needs than kind of the average allergy sufferer typically does. They do also state that they request that you don't contact them any sooner than 14 days prior to your arrival, just so they can kind of keep the window straight and the timing of that. And then with the information you provide, the special diets team will assist you in navigating the dining process, which may include providing the restaurants that you intend to visit with advance notice. So that's where that 14-day window is important, because they want to make sure they give adequate notice to any of those restaurants that need it, but not too far out. So that way, depending on what you need, they may not need it yet. So they want to kind of find that sweet spot within 14 days of your arrival, so that way they can prepare accordingly for that. Um, if you are visiting in person in those restaurants, then once you actually get there, you'll be given the opportunity to talk to either the chef or a cast member that is special diets trained. So it depends on the location, depends on who's available, depends on a lot of different things with staffing and everything at the restaurants. But you'll be able to talk to somebody that can directly help you with your needs. So again, we talked about that you'll be able to view those ingredients list is actually really nice, because I just went through this and when I went on my trip, because I have just a few allergies, and they're not necessarily, again, not life threatening, but there's something that I can tolerate in small quantities. So sometimes I ask and sometimes I just kind of know, like, nope, this will be fine kind of deal, as I've learned to
For
navigate
more
my
like a
own.
digestive disorder.
Yes. So garlic is a really big trigger for me, and that one's been a little tricky to navigate in the parks, unfortunately, because a lot of their like pre-seasoned and pre-made stuff has a lot of garlic in it, which I know is also an allergy that Stevie suffers from. So we've both been through that. But the really nice thing is you will just request to speak to a chef or request, an allergy consultation, and they will come out. And when I spoke to the chef at a couple different locations, they had an iPad, and on the iPad, they had the full menu, and they just clicked into the category, clicked the item, and they could show me the entire ingredient label. And they literally just said, here, I want you to read this, make sure what you see looks okay. And then, we went on to the next thing. And it was even as far down as, the sauces that they put on the sandwiches, or the dressing that they put on the salads, or the seasoning on the French fries if it has it. All of that they have broken down into individual ingredients, which is really, really nice.
The iPad is really nice too because it used to be in a binder and it took a while to flip through it, especially if you were in a cafeteria at a resort, because that binder contains everything in all like 5 or 6 of the windows that you can order from. And so it would take a while to kind of find what you need. And so it's the iPad is absolutely lovely. Technology is wonderful, which actually leads me to our next point, that mobile order is one of my favorite additions to the park, that you can just kind of plan ahead and just be able to pick up your food at will. However, I can only do that now that I know what is and isn't a safe food. Unfortunately, if you need to speak to a chef about your allergies, you will not be able to do that via mobile order. You will have to uh, unless it's one of their allergy foods that's already listed, you will have to, like, wait till you're there and speak to a chef that way.
Yeah, you can
In order
definitely
to
order the allergy safe menu items. So if it's something that's listed and pre-listed on the app and you see it, that is good to go. You're definitely able to go ahead and mobile order that. But if it's an additional request, like what I had to do with asking about garlic, that's not listed on the app. So I have to speak to a chef in that situation. And I cannot,
or if you
unfortunately, mobile order.
yeah, or if you wanna make a substitution. So, for example, I will very regularly order gluten-free pizza with just cheese and no sauce because the tomato sauce usually has garlic, and cheese bread is Great. And so you'd think that because I think in a couple different locations, the gluten-free pizza is listed as one of those allergy-friendly options. However, I cannot in the app adjust that so they make it without the tomato sauce. And so therefore I still have to go in and order it in person. And so you can talk to the cast member that's taking your order, whether they're behind a grill or at a cash register, and they will be able to radio somebody and bring them out to speak to you. I have had experiences where it's the chef that's in the back, or they will have a manager come forward and they will make sure to take notes and communicate that properly and send it back to the people that are working on the food. So after you go through that process, either via speaking to the chef or to the manager, they will place your order and they will typically provide you with a little buzzer that you can go find a seat, or the rest of your party maybe can pick up their order. You can get your drinks, you can get comfortable, and that will buzz whenever your order is ready. They will usually give you a specific window that you can come back and pick it up at. Also, will color code restaurants the tray that they're being given or that you're being I think in most places it's purple, and that's a way for them to visually indicate, "Hey, this is a special allergy request. It's gotta be separate. It can't come into contact with anybody else. We need to take extra care and make sure that this goes to the person that it needs to go to." It also will sometimes be marked with a toothpick, to indicate it as an allergy meal, and it's really great that they've got this whole process set up, and you should know when you order exactly what you need to do, where to go. I love being able to just sit and hang out until it's ready because sometimes it takes a little longer to prepare things because they want to make sure that everything is clean, and it's very straightforward.
So, likewise, when you are visiting table service restaurants, you also will have the ability to speak to either a manager or a trained cast member or the chef about your concerns. So, you definitely want to let your server know, and they will almost always ask. Like, they're going to seat you, or you're going to get seated by the hostess. And then when the server comes, they're going to take your drink order and like double check about any allergies or special dietary needs and things like that. You can also note these on your if you're doing, an ADR, an advanced dining reservation, you can note it in that reservation. There is a little place where you can put, like, special dietary needs. Granted, it's not full encompassing, it typically just lists those 9 categories that Stevie told us earlier, so I think there's probably an other if I had to guess, but I don't remember off the top of my head in that listing what all is there and available for you to use. And then you can also do the same and make sure that it's in there whenever you check in. So typically check in happens on your app. And it will again ask you about dietary needs. It should pre-populate anything that you entered when you made the reservation, and so you can double check that it's in there. And then when you are seated, the little like slip that the hostess gets and then transfers to the server should have that listed on there for them to have as well. So that way they have access to see that. So you don't have to necessarily explain everything if it's already in the app for them, which is nice. And again, the server will note any of that and they will help determine what types of conversations with the kitchen need to happen. So it may not be a, hey, we have to immediately bring the chef out to speak to you kind of deal. It may be something that your server can help take care of for you if it's one of the more quote unquote normal or typical allergies that they see and that they're prepared for in their kitchen, but it really just depends on the situation. Again, you can always ask to see those ingredient lists because they're going to have them at your table service restaurants as well. So if you're concerned or if the cast members that are serving you do their best, but they don't know everything. So if they're not sure or you're not sure if they're sure, just ask to see the list. You want to be more safe than sorry. And they'll probably also suggest that as well, because like we said, Disney is really great. They train, especially their food service cast members, really well with all of the allergy needs and things like that. And just a quick note, if you are at a table service that is a buffet, it gets a little tricky there, depending on what your allergy needs are. But typically, what will happen is either the manager or the chef can walk around with you and point out different like dishes that are safe. If it's a severe allergy and you're worried about cross contamination, most of the time they're going to just make you something in the back and then bring it out to your table. So that way you don't have to go through the buffet. You don't have to worry about if this spoon crossed into this dish and all that kind of cross contamination when it comes to allergies. So, a couple differences with buffets, but either way, they're still equipped to take care of you there as well.
I do want to add that I would still take a look at buffets at what the existing items are, and you'll get an idea of whether or not it's something that they may be able to substitute or not. When we ate at Chef Mickey's some time ago on a trip together, I, I they provide Mickey waffles as a part of the buffet, which means that they can make gluten-free Mickey waffles in the back. And I think the chef underestimated how hungry I was and was only making like one at a time, and they're, like, small, and I think that
Yeah.
they're not big, and there wasn't much else that I could eat besides some fruit, and he kept, like, coming back, and he almost seemed, like, annoyed, and I'm just like, "Listen, I am a hungry person, and we're on a Disney trip, like, I don't." And so, that was something that, like, I know now, like, I might wanna, like, prepare them that it's just like, "This is primarily what I'm going to be eating, I won't be eating any meat because I'm a vegetarian, therefore, please keep that in mind, and you won't have to make like several different batches over and over again and then have to talk to me every time. If you just make me, I don't know, 8 or 9 at once." I've been at other table service restaurants where that's not been a thing,
Yeah.
where it's not been an issue. It's just been, it was at that buffet. And I'm going to be honest, I have not gone back to a buffet only because it's just, there's so few things that I can eat that it usually doesn't justify the cost of a plate for me.
Right.
So that makes a big difference too when you're kind of weighing where you do want to go or don't want to go. And so I found that if we're doing a sit down restaurant, I'm better off doing table service than I am trying to do a buffet.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because if you're looking at the list also for buffets, you're going to be able to see the generally the offerings. They don't provide like every item on the apps that you can find for those buffets. So somewhere like Crystal Palace or Chef Mickey's or any of those other ones are going to give you a general idea, but it's not going to list everything on there. But you can get a good idea of looking at what their main dishes are, determining whether or not you're going to be able to eat it, and that may help you decide whether or not you even want to go because I mean, for various reasons, Disney is not going to discount your meal just because of that. And we're not going to get into whether they should or not. That's not why we're here. But they're not going to. So you're still going to be paying the same price as somebody who's eating everything off of the buffet to eat whatever foods are safe for you. So again, something to consider when you're looking at especially buffets. Table service, more of your standard table service is going to be a lot easier to justify cost because they should have some additional options depending. Again, always look at those menus to see what options you have before you go.
Well, and that's something that I always think about because when we go to table service restaurants, if I can eat something beforehand or, I've got, or eat something after, if we're doing like snacks and just like going or making our way around Epcot or whatever, and I'm not paying to be there to enjoy the company of my friends, even though I'm not eating anything. And that is the struggle with buffets. I can't
Yeah.
just come for the atmosphere and the character dining. I'm still paying $50 to watch people eat, which is not really a fun experience.
Right. Yeah, you wanna look out for those prefix menus or preset, prices that people are gonna pay, and you'll be able to see that on the menus when you look at that online. You'll be able to see that it just gives you one generic price for adults to dine there rather than individual prices for the dishes that are on the menu. So something else to note depending on what your needs are and how severe they are, that can definitely be a good indicator for what style of restaurant you're gonna be at if you take a look at the menu.
And while table service and quick service restaurants are pretty accommodating when it comes to substitutions, carts and kiosks unfortunately are not. They're just not equipped to do that. It is predetermined snacks at that cart, like at a churro cart. Like they can't just go in the back and make you a gluten-free churro because they just have the stock that's at their individual kiosk, which is sad. It's part of what makes the Port Orleans restaurant in Walt Disney World so wonderful, that resort, because they offer beignets and those are attached to a kitchen. So you can order gluten-free beignets, and that's absolutely wonderful. And I love that so, so much. I would love to see someplace in the future offer churros like at attached to a kitchen so that way I could get to eat a gluten-free churro. But it's something to keep in mind. So festival kiosks, if you're eating your way around Epcot during Food and Wine or Flower and Garden, or popcorn carts, they just may not be an option for you, which is unfortunate. And I feel your pain if you're listening to this, and that's something that you're dealing with too. Cassie just made a very good point, that she asked for the eggs Benedict at a kiosk without salmon at a festival booth, and they asked if it was an allergy or a preference, which is great. So that is something to keep in mind, that depending on how the food is made, they may be able to take something off if it's a preference. And for me, with like wheat, for example, I can come into contact with it. It's not like I have celiac and it's getting gluten. It's just a digestive thing. So if it's cooked on the same surface, I'm not going to have an issue. And so, if I ask for something without it, as long as it's not frozen that way or baked into it,
Right.
they can usually still accommodate in that specific way, but that may require some questions to figure out how it's made and whether or not it's an option.
Yeah, so like a sauce or something like that that could be that you see them physically putting on right before they
Mhm.
hand it to you could potentially be left off. Again, you just have to ask and talk to the cast member and talk when you're ordering. Don't wait till you get up to the kitchen window if you can avoid it just because they're trying to get through people. But speak to the cast member when you're ordering at those kiosks, especially like the festival booths, are probably more likely to do that. Popcorn carts, churro carts, probably not as likely because a lot of that just comes to them pre-made and then they dish it out to the guests.
Yes, absolutely. And depending on your allergies, you may also be able to find safe prepackaged snacks in some of the gift shops. And what's nice about that is they've got all of the nutrition facts on the back. So if you're overstimulated and you don't want to talk to anybody,
Yep.
you can just do reading yourself, and and maybe even check out on your phone and not have to really engage with the cashier. And you could just show them on your phone when you check out.
Yeah, and Disney has done a lot lately with introducing some like well-known either vegan brands or allergy-friendly brands for a lot of stuff. So if you go into either like depending on the resort you're at, sometimes they have that stuff in like little center islands in the actual what's the word I'm looking for? Inside of where the kitchens are, right? Like when you're going to the different lines to get things, sometimes they'll have them right inside of there, and other times it'll be in the gift shop. But they do have a lot more of the kind of allergy-friendly prepackaged stuff now than they used to even just 5 or 6 years ago. The other thing to keep in mind is that everything that we've said here today also applies to any sort of like bakery cases that you may see. So, like if you're going into the confectionery at Magic Kingdom and you want to try to look for a treat, but you're concerned about allergens, again, ask a cast member. They're going to have the same kind of policy and procedure as a lot of the restaurants are. They're going to find either a manager or, if it's the head baker, I don't know what they call them. Sorry, cast members, I love you. Whoever it is that can give you that information, they're gonna again radio to them, have you speak with them about what your concerns are. So anything like that. And the same thing applies for if you're getting like a baked good out of a like case in any of the other like quick service places. That information is also going to be on the iPads or in the books or wherever you're getting the information. So even if you're not ordering like made to order stuff and you're just grabbing stuff that's pre-made out of cases, they're still going to have that ingredient list as well. So anything you can come into contact with, Disney is going to have the ingredient list for you.
And that includes at Epcot in individual countries. I was at the stand in Germany, the caramel shop, and they were able to pull out a binder because we were trying to determine whether or not something had egg in it for my husband. And so some places do not necessarily have the iPad. Some places are still working off of that binder. But I mentioned that because third-party vendors will sometimes function a little differently at Disney, and it can be kind of hard to tell what is or isn't a third party vendor. For the most part, that really just means locations that are at Disney Springs or downtown Disney in Disneyland. They generally follow the same guidelines, but I found it's not as consistent of a process as it is on Disney property.
Yeah.
They seem to be aware that this is something that Disney offers, and it's usually part of their process, especially if they ask. Like they are accustomed to people being used to doing this on Disney property, that they're prepared to accommodate it. However, the procedure might look a little different. I definitely would make sure to double check a little more carefully than you already are when it comes to third party vendors. Um, and again, most of the time, this is not specifically in the Disney park. The exception would be like the Joffrey stands that are in some of the parks. However, I there are some of those stands within the parks themselves that I believe are trained in the same way that Disney is. So, for example, Joffrey's is technically third party, like I said, but whenever I've had questions, they've always interacted with me the same way that like they do at the bakery or anywhere else. So they're either trained the same way, familiar enough with the way everybody else interacts, or I've just always gotten really lucky with the cast members that I've interacted with, and they're accustomed to being asked and are happy to help. So it's just something to keep in mind as you kind of navigate through all of this. And you'll start to learn the way things function, especially, the second or third day into your trip if you're there for a little longer.
Yeah, and I think somewhere like Joffrey's, because they are inside of the parks, I think that makes a huge difference with their partnership with Disney. They're basically cast members, other than the fact that their paycheck doesn't come from the mouse, right?
Yeah.
So they
Definitely
know.
still cast members.
Right, exactly. Like they
Just
know.
training looks a little different for them.
Yes. So they're going to follow very similar procedures. They may not have the iPad, but they're probably going to have a book or a sheet or a something. They have less ingredients at a coffee stand than you have at like a quick service restaurant, obviously, but they're going to be able to tell you what they have. And the other nice thing is that a lot of Joffrey's now will offer more like alternative options for like milk and sugar free and things like that too. So Joffrey's has definitely kind of followed Disney's lead when it comes to their offerings as well.
And I've noticed that some of those cast members will even be able to answer some of those questions off the top of their head because they get it so often. And they will still provide you the ingredients if you want to see.
Right.
But like if I will just ask, like, hey, do you know if this is dairy free? And they'll be able to like tell you. And so for me, when it's a digestive thing and not an allergy, it's just really nice that I can just kind of like pop over and know really fast, especially because Joffrey's offerings are pretty standard from park to park. So I can ask at one park because I want to know what I can eat for a snack the next day.
Right.
And I can and go in and prepare for that and set my expectations around whatever treat I'm gonna get.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think we've got some additional advice and tips to share. What else do we have?
Yes, just to make this process smoother, there are some foods that are easily Googleable for major ingredients. So, for example, Dole Whip, for the most part, is dairy free as long as you don't get it combined with the soft serve. Whenever there's a new flavor for different seasons, I'm usually able to find the answer online. So, if there's something that you've heard talked about online or you've seen scrolling through TikTok that there's a new snack that everybody's obsessed with, for a lot of those major ingredients, there's usually some blogger that has that information somewhere and you can kind of get an idea and prepare that way, which I find really helpful that there's so much that's easily Googleable these days.
Yeah, and Dole Whip, especially, like if it's a name brand, you're going to be able to find their allergy stuff online for the most part. Now, you may not always know what brand of food Disney is using, but for something like a Dole Whip, that's a little more obvious
Yes,
for you to look
yes.
up ahead of time.
Yes. And in terms of more tips in terms of making this process go smoothly, my number one tip is to plan in extra time for your meal breaks because your meal breaks will include talking to the chef and sometimes waiting for them to be notified. And it can still take longer than if you were just ordering off of the menu. They want to keep you safe. That's why the process is what it is. Disney's improved this process in the last 10 years about how efficient this goes. But it through personal experience, I have noticed how much longer it can sometimes take just because sometimes they're understaffed, sometimes they're really slammed, and they're doing the best that they can. But sometimes, especially in cafeteria settings at the resorts, the cast member will have to page a chef in the back, and that paging system has not always been reliable. And then sometimes they have to send somebody physically back there to go on a foot chase to kind of track down wherever the chef is. And so sometimes I would wait more than 10 minutes just to order my food, and then they would still have to like cook it and bring it out to me and all of that, and I'd be waiting for it to be made. So I've waited anywhere from like 20 minutes to a worst case scenario, an hour and a half for literally just pasta because the communication process was not clear. The cast members were not really set up for success from that order, from showing up at the counter to the chef request point. I That length of time is not the norm. I don't know whether or not they forgot about me, but I bring it up because I think it illustrates how well they've standardized the process over the years. It was a while ago that this happened, but the format was still theoretically the same. You walk to the counter, you notify the cast member gets the chef comes out and talks to you, chef makes the food, chef sends it to the cast member, and then the cast member notifies you that you can pick it up. Lots and lots of steps, obviously, and they want to keep you safe, and I'm never bothered by that. But it does mean that it is a longer process, and you should definitely plan that if you know that you're going to have to speak to a chef and you can't order straight off of the menu, to allot a little extra time in there.
Yeah, especially because they don't pre-make any allergy meals, right? You know, if you're ordering off the menu, chances are good they've already started what you're ordering because they go through that many during the mealtime, and Disney knows how many, generally speaking, per hour they have to make and all that kind of stuff, but they don't pre-make anything. One of my last trips, I was at ABC Commissary and I was getting a chicken sandwich, and the chicken had to be made completely from not unmade, like it had to be. That was a really great sentence.
Chickens are in a coop over in Galaxy's Edge.
I
You
know.
gotta go chase it down.
But they couldn't just put on the pre-made seasonings and stuff because it had garlic in it. So I had to wait essentially for as long as it would take me to cook a chicken breast. That's what I had to wait for them to do. And that was after speaking to them and after making sure and after placing the order, then I had to wait. So that definitely makes sense.
And it happened at Art of Animation.
Yeah.
And I can remember like being in, because I was already so hungry. So like part of the allotting for time is not just the time it takes out of your day. It's anticipating your own hunger cues,
Yeah.
and knowing that if you are very hungry, you are still going to have to wait a little longer. And so keep in mind in terms of bringing snacks with you, or just not waiting so long to go get food if you notice that you're starting to get hungry.
Yeah.
I will say Art of Animation, I about cried the last time that we went most recently because they had a dedicated area in the cafeteria where you walk up and there are two stanchions there that you stand between. And that is the line that you wait in. That is also the place that you can pick it up. It is so much more simple than just picking one of the 7 different windows and finding a cast member. Like, there is a procedure, there is a chef that's like dedicated to doing that, that is very accustomed to interfacing with people about allergens. Now, the chefs always had been, but with the iPad, it just seems like they're setting the chefs up for success too. And so because of that, the chef that I spoke to, I was just so overflowing with gratitude. And I think that they've started to understand the stress with which people with allergies are under when they're making this trip. And she was very happy that I was so relieved that I found things that I could eat, and was happy that she could help. And so Disney is learning and definitely takes feedback and is adapting. So I love knowing that they're paying attention to that kind of thing as well, and they're trying to find better ways to improve the process.
Yeah. And again, waiting 40 minutes plus is not the norm. Is not the norm at all. I think, my chicken probably took 20 minutes, which is longer than you're used to waiting at those quick service restaurants because they're typically so efficient and so quick. So it's going to feel long, but it's really not, again, any longer than what it would take you to probably prepare and boil your gluten-free pasta at home,
Yeah.
because that's exactly what they're doing back in
It
the
just
kitchen.
feels longer if you're hungry, and that's why you need to prepare. So the next smoothing tip that I have, if you've been to one Disney park on one part of the country or in one part of the world, and you are going to a different Disney park for the first time, I need you to know that not all of the basic food items are the same between each park. Now, that might sound obvious when you're thinking about Walt Disney World and Disneyland Paris. Of course, they're in wildly different countries. However, I need you to learn from my experience that Disney World and Disneyland do not source their things from the same places. So I knew that I could have the gluten-free pizza crust at Walt Disney World. I had done it for years. And so when we went to Disneyland, I was very excited. I was like, I'm going to get my pizza. It's going to be great. I ordered it, didn't think anything about it, and I got it. And fortunately, I did not take a bite of it. And again, it's not a lethal allergy. My throat would have just been itchy if I had it, and I obviously don't want to deal with that. However, I could see that it was not the normal crust. It was much thinner and there was stuff in it, and obviously garlic has a smell to it as well. And I was like, this is not what I thought I was going to get. And I went and I talked to them. I was like, is this something that we can do a substitute with or whatever? Garlic is pre-baked into the crust in Disneyland. So I just can't have pizza when I'm over at Disneyland, which was just a wild thing for me to learn, because to me, there's so much that Disney standardizes, and there's so many things that are similar between the way that restaurants in particular are run at Disneyland and Disney World. And it never would have occurred to me that there's some things that are different, especially because there are some things that are absolutely the same. Like, I would like to believe that the fries are just like the same everywhere in the US because they're French fries. But that's not necessarily the case for everything. And it's just something to keep in mind, that you will have to go through the process all over again. And if it's been several years since a previous trip, you should still go through the process all over again, because they may have changed their where they're sourcing their ingredients.
And another place that is really good to, if you're Googling and you can't really find what you're looking for, or you just want some more advice or experience, Facebook groups for allergies at the parks. I am positive they exist. I'm not in one, but I'm positive that they exist for all of the parks in the world, probably. And even places like Reddit threads may be super helpful for finding other people's input and other people's experiences with either similar dietary needs or just allergies in general at specific locations. Chatting with kind of other Disney people about their experience can be really helpful. So take some time to kind of look around and see what you can find on there. Now, take it with a grain of salt, because these are strangers on the internet that you're hearing from, but it may give you at least some basis to go off of if you can combine that with knowledge from the Disney website. And they both check out, you're probably in good
You can
hands
keep
when
it
it comes to
together.
that. Yes,
Yeah, I
exactly.
will say I am going to touch on some of the international parks at the end. I have found that on this for the stateside parks, Reddit is usually a little more helpful. I've not found a consistent Facebook group that I like for Disneyland or Disney World. That's not to say they don't exist. I'm sure they do. But Reddit is usually where I've been able to find the type of information I'm looking for.
Yeah. And then just another advice that I found helpful for these last two trips when I went to Disney with my newly discovered allergies, because the last two trips I took were the first two that I went knowing that I had kind of an allergy to garlic and some other dietary things. But making a list of your safe foods, so that way ahead of time, so that way it will alleviate some of that stress that we talked about earlier when it comes to ordering early enough and not letting yourself get hangry while you're waiting for your food, but making a list of your safe foods that you know you can have in the parks. That way, if you get to a point where you're hot and you're hungry and you just are frustrated, because I know I get that way. Eating has always, and I've talked about this a little bit with our Mom Street community, but eating has always just been kind of stressful for me because I'm a very picky eater. And so now adding dietary needs and allergies on top of that, I get very easily overwhelmed when I'm looking at menus in the moment. So I almost always will plan out ahead of time where we're going to eat and plan out ahead of time what I'm going to order. So that way, when it comes to it and it's crazy and chaotic and you're after, you've been in the parks for 5, 6 hours, I know what I'm gonna order, and I know that it's safe, and I don't have to second guess it. Or I know what I'm gonna order after I talk to the chef, whatever that looks like for you. But making that list, I think, is really helpful to alleviate some of that stress. If you are anything like me and Stevie, making that list ahead of time can be really helpful, especially if it's your first time going to the parks with that allergy.
And this is why I said at the beginning of the podcast that allergies at the Disney parks are near to my heart. They are not dear to my heart. It is not fun dealing with this. I empathize with anybody else that is trying to prepare. I understand how difficult it is to navigate through the world in general. And that's, again, why I like being at Disney so much, because it is slightly less stressful than it is everywhere else, because it's easier to set my expectations.
So now, if we're still worried, what else can we do?
If you are still worried about finding food, there are some tips that we have for you. One of my favorite things to do, and the safest things for me to do if I'm really stressed about what to do and finding food, is to use an app like Instacart. Or Amazon Prime, Target, Garden Grocer to deliver food to your hotel, so you don't have to worry about bringing food with you or taking a lift to the store if that works in your schedule. Um, that means that you can maybe eat breakfast in the food, eat breakfast in your room before you leave, which is something that Mom Street USA recommends regularly. It makes things go a lot more smoothly if you don't have to worry about stopping for food when you're trying to rope drop rise of resistance.
Yes.
And same thing for packing snacks or packing whole meals. Um, Specifically, I a lot of times I will bring food down with me, which is great because I will eat through it and then I have room for souvenirs on the way back. And I love bringing the pre-made oatmeal cups and using hot water via the Keurig that's in the room, or going to the cafeteria at the resort and using the microwave to just get hot water. And then hot water can make so many meals out of more food. You could also use that for noodle cups. Keep in mind that the cafeteria will likely have hours that they're closed, that you won't always be able to depend on that being an option, or heating something up in the microwave. If you have prepackaged cereal cups, that's another thing that I love bringing down, or something that you could Instacart. I find that there's usually single serve soy milk containers in the hotel cafeteria fridges that you can buy. And so I will fly down with cereal cups that I bought at Wegmans and then just get the milk when I'm there. And it works out really great, especially because I will go, maybe when we first check in, I will buy milk for that week. And then I just keep it in the fridge in the room and I can eat it in the morning, which is works out great. And it is so much less stressful when I know that those are the meals that I know I can depend upon. There is something in my stomach to build a foundation for the day.
Yeah, I think breakfast is super important for anyone in general, but especially for people who are concerned about finding food in the parks, because if you can start your day off right and know that you have food in your room that you can eat, I think it makes a world of difference.
Absolutely. I do want to touch on the international parks before we wrap up. I can only speak to Disneyland Paris and Tokyo Disney. I do plan on visiting Hong Kong and Shanghai at some point in the future, one day. So at Disneyland Paris, there is a grocery store within a 5-minute train ride of the park. And so if you're not familiar with the setup of Disneyland Paris, the park is just like Disneyland, where they're right across from each other. And then if you exit that little entryway, there's a train station that literally runs right into the park. And so you could be visiting in Paris, or you could be staying on Disney property, and you can go to and from the city center and Disneyland Paris with relative ease. It was absolutely wonderful when we were there. And so we did that a couple points during our trip. We would take our reusable bags, and there was a big mall, and partially outdoor, partially indoor. It's called Val d'Europe, Val de Europe, if I'm using my American accent. Uh, um, so that is the name of the plaza that has lots of stores. There's a little food court where we were able to eat before we went grocery shopping. But the supermarket that I liked, because they had a pretty solid gluten-free section, there was like a whole aisle where I could get gluten-free muffins and gluten-free crackers that I could put peanut butter on top of, just like all kinds of things, is called Auchan. It's spelled Auchan, Chan, if I'm using a hard Americanized accent. They actually had a whole second floor of the store, and so we grabbed some spoons and stuff there because I didn't think I should have. Pro tip: pack if you're bringing food with you, if you plan on doing this, either grab some reusable silverware from a dining area at your resort, or just bring that with you from home. I didn't think about it, so I have a spoon in my kitchen that I bought at Disneyland Paris. It's great. It's got a little wooden handle. It's very cute. And I was like, oh, I'm buying this and then I'm keeping it. Um, But I bring this up in particular because I feel that going grocery shopping at Disneyland Paris is probably your best bet to stay fed, especially if you're avoiding gluten. I do not have celiac disease, but in my quest to avoid wheat, I have learned how very, very difficult it is to find celiac safe options at Disneyland Paris. I did find a very wonderful Facebook group called Gluten Free Disneyland Paris, and they stay pretty up to date with Disneyland Paris's very minimal options. Um, I am very fortunate that I can still have food that is prepared on the same surface as wheat. And so some of the food stands are willing to make substitutions, some of them are not. Every food stand at Disneyland Paris seems to have a different process, and it's very affected by the cast member that's managing the booth. There's not a lot of consistency between the quick service locations. I knew to expect that inconsistency going in because they talk about it in the Facebook group all the time. And it was still very frustrating. And that included with cast members that were fluent in English. Um, it was hard for them to understand that I could still have something that was prepared on the same surface, and buckwheat and wheat are not the same thing, and that there's just so many variables. And
Yeah.
there are some cast members that are prepared to take you at your word, and there are others that are just very concerned that they're going to have an angry guest yelling at them after they've eaten or after they try to eat, and they just don't want to serve you at all. I understand, I respect it. It does make it very hard to stay prepared, which is why I really, really, really recommend grocery shopping, because it will make sure that you can at least get something. And you will see in that Facebook group, if gluten is the thing that you're trying to avoid, the anecdotes that people have of the struggles that they've gone through. So it's really something that you need to build into your schedule. If, in my opinion, to just plan on maybe the day that you get in, you check into your hotel, you drop off of your stuff, and then you take the train over. That was what we did. It was great. And then we just went to bed once we got back from the grocery store. We actually got back at around like 5 p.m. And then I think I slept for like 15 hours and caught up on my sleep. So it worked out really great in terms of avoiding jet lag. I woke up the next day and I was fully on Paris time.
Right. Well, and I think that's just an issue at Disneyland Paris in general, unfortunately, is that food service over there in the most recent years seems to be a struggle for them. They have a lot of places that will just kind of close unexpectedly, and processes are not completely ironed out. So I think just food in general is something to prepare for, let alone allergies over there.
I did learn that the hard way. Theoretically, they theoretically had a dairy-free, like, ice cream bar that you could get from most of the food locations. However, they were sold out of it park-wide, but
Mhm.
their system in the app, in their mobile orders, and at the register was not updated. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we have that." And I spent 25 or 30 minutes waiting at a couple different restaurants because they're like, "No, no, no, we have it." And they would search and they would be like, "Sorry," like, or not even apologizing, like, "We don't have it." And like, I which was frustrating because there seemed to be no sympathy for the fact that I just stood there and waited for 30
Right.
minutes where they told me, "Yes, yes, we absolutely have this." And they're like, "Nope." And I'm just like,
Right.
okay, that's
Right.
frustrating. I don't expect guest recovery by any means, but every time there's ever been a process like that in Disney World or Disneyland where they're telling you and they're convinced of one thing and then that isn't what happens, they're like, "Can we get you like a drink or something? Like, can we do
Right.
something to like as an apology for all of this confusion?"
Right.
Again, not something I expect, but there was just no sympathy whatsoever, and it was just frustrating to you know, be told one thing and see it in the app and be able to make the order, and then them having to void the request out once you got further along and they discover that they didn't actually have it. So
Right.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah. Now, when you visited the grocery store in at Disneyland, well, not at Disneyland Paris, but near Disneyland Paris, were you able to find ingredient lists that were all in English on the items that you were purchasing,
That is an
or was it
excellent
varied?
question. It is varied. It depends on the distributor for the food. And that being said, that meant that sometimes it was in French and Spanish on the package. Sometimes it
Mhm.
was French and English. The Google Translate app on your phone is your best friend. You don't need to type anything in. There is a little camera setting on Google Translate, and you can hold your phone over a label and it will translate it for you. That also came in very handy in Tokyo. Tokyo usually, well, I guess I take it back. Depending on where we were, they would have English information there just because it's a tourist language, and
Right.
Japan is trying to be very accommodating to tourists, whereas the culture is just very different in different countries, and Paris is not necessarily like that. So Google Translate, again, your best friend. Bring a portable charger for your phone if you think it's going to drain your battery. But I did stand there for a solid 45 minutes in that aisle, just holding my phone over different things to figure out what I could eat and then putting it in my little basket. So
Right.
yeah.
And if you're someone that has maybe one or two allergies, maybe look up the name of them in French or
Yes.
Japanese or whatever whatever language of wherever you're visiting. Maybe just look up that word and save it somewhere in your phone. It's different if you're looking for 5, 6, or 7 different things to have it all kind of ironed out. And a Google Translate is probably better in that situation. But do a quick little prep if you're looking for just 1 or 2 ingredients. That will probably save you some time.
Absolutely. For example, my husband is just avoiding eggs because he's allergic, and he just needs to know "ugh." Like that's all he's got to know
Right.
when he's reading through something. And because it's one of those major ingredients, they will usually pull that out, and it's a lot easier to find
Yes.
immediately, or it's bolded or something else.
Right.
Whereas like I'm looking for, I don't know, maybe 35 different things that might show up
Right.
that would make me sick.
Right. Exactly. Yes. So speaking of Tokyo, what can you tell us about allergies in Tokyo?
Tokyo is wildly different, but also easier to plan for. So I will start by saying that Tokyo Disney, they have a small grocery store in their version of Downtown Disney or Disney Springs. That area of Tokyo Disney is called Expiari. They have a small little market in that center, in that plaza. It is wonderful. I loved being there so much. And that to me is the best way to ensure that you have food to eat, because the culture in Tokyo Disney is that they will not make substitutions for allergies. So
Interesting.
if you needed to avoid gluten and they had pizza, you would not be able to order a gluten-free pizza. They have a dedicated allergy menu that you can order from, and if you can only order from that menu as is. So I don't know if it's a culture thing. I'm not sure if that's something that happens at restaurants in Japan outside of Disney property. I think it's just a way to be consistent to help ease the burden of what's going on in the kitchen because of the foot traffic that they have coming in. However, conversely to Disneyland Paris, Tokyo Disney does have all of their ingredient information. Well, they're very clear online about a lot of their ingredients, and you can find all of that information online while you are still in the US, which is absolutely wonderful. I am not really even able to do that to the same extent for Walt Disney World or Disneyland.
Right.
And so Japanese law has a different list of major ingredients. The major ingredients in the US are milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. And in Japan, those their major allergens still include dairy products, eggs, peanuts, walnuts, but it also includes shrimp and crab, which maybe falls under crustacean shellfish. I don't we'll leave that to the experts. Wheat and buckwheat, but Tokyo Disney's website also filters by what they refer to as 20 major allergens for which labeling is recommended. And so that includes, and I'm going to take a deep breath here, almonds, abalone, squid, salmon caviar, oranges, cashew, kiwis, beef, sesame, salmon, mackerel, soy, chicken, bananas, pork, matsutake mushrooms, peaches, mountain yam, apples, and gelatin.
Whoa. That's
So
crazy.
many allergens. And so what I appreciated being that fructose is very prevalent it naturally occurs in apples, and
Yeah.
apples are very frequently used as a sweetener for all kinds of things that you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be. And so
Right.
I loved that I could just look through and filter by all of these different ingredients that I was trying to avoid, and it would give me specifically what was left throughout either of the park. If you Google Tokyo Disney allergies, their main website will come up and you will have to like check that you like agree to their legal terms that about, all of the, like we said at the beginning of the show, in terms of like you're in charge of your own medical needs in your body. This is just the information we're providing to you. But it was so nice to plan that way from the comfort of my own home and not be trying to make decisions on the fly,
Yeah.
especially because they won't do any substitutions whatsoever. So while it is far more labeled, they can't cater the meal to like specifically what you can or can't
Mm.
have. So keep that in mind when you're planning.
That's so fascinating to me that they have that many more labels that they'll put on things. That's really nice. It's really nice.
And I wish that it was something I wish that it was the way that Disney World and Disneyland functions,
Yeah.
because then you can look property wide at all of the foods you could possibly eat and plan your day. Like if you like, oh, we're hungry, we could go in any different direction. Where do we want to go? Like I can see, oh, okay, I know that, my husband wants to eat here. Like this is what we might do. And so it made things a lot easier in terms of planning and making a list of safe places that we could eat. I do want to add, we've talked a little bit about Tokyo. We will be doing Tokyo episodes in the future. Do want to add, if you're worried about Tokyo Disney food, they have plenty of food that you would be familiar with. They have the standard like American fare, burgers and French fries. There are all kinds of things, as well as food that's more native to Tokyo and Japan in general. So keep that in mind. It's not all food that I don't know, that may or may not be unfamiliar to you, or is, it's not something that's just like wildly different than what you're accustomed to in Disneyland or Disney World. So another just like food note there. I will say,
Helpful.
I was able to manage on this trip because our hotel, the Ambassador Hotel, which is a Tokyo Disney resort, had a kettle in the room, and the kettle would bring the water to a boil as a kettle should. But it meant that I literally made penne pasta for myself in the room. I bought a package of pasta at the market, and I bought a bowl at the Sanrio store, a Hello Kitty bowl, because it was ceramic and I knew it could like handle hot water. And I put the pasta in the bowl and waited for the water to boil. And then I used the tray that the ice bucket was on as like a makeshift lid. And I would just let it sit there in the bowl in the water until the water cooled off. And then I repeated that process 3 more times. And so I ate pasta for lunch every day because I made it myself in the room.
Hey, she's nothing but, inventive when it comes to making food in a hotel room in
I
a
want
different
to
country.
I want to bring it up because it's just, if you get creative, there are definitely options that you have, especially if you are really concerned about being able to control some of those things yourself. I was overjoyed when I saw that we had a kettle, because then I was like, wait a minute. I have so many more options now if we have a kettle, because the Keurig and the other like coffee makers don't necessarily spit out water that is that hot. So it was very exciting for me in particular.
Can confirm I got a text message from Stevie about the room pasta experience while she was in Tokyo, because she was very excited about the fact that she had figured out how to make pasta in her room.
It's great. I felt very proud of myself. I was like, I am so smart. I am doing the thing. But that is the anecdote that I'm gonna close us out on, is my pride in cooking on the fly.
I love it. Well, we hope that the information has been helpful to you guys. Again, we probably didn't cover everything, but we did our best to kind of touch on the basics and give you guys a layout of kind of how allergies work, mostly at the US based park. There's also a little bit at the international parks as well. Stevie, what final thoughts do you have for us before we wrap up completely?
Never be afraid to advocate for yourself and for your needs. If something feels wrong in your gut, if you're worried that somebody doesn't truly understand you, go with that feeling. You are on vacation. You do not want to risk being sick, or worse, a hospital trip. That is not something that anybody needs to play around with. So trust your gut. Don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. If you are traveling internationally, you could print out a card that has your allergens on it. Obviously, that works for places that can do substitutions, or if you need to ask a question about something that you're not necessarily able to find online, they may have to tell you, like, oh, no, you can't have that. It does have that food ingredient and maybe can't, find work with you in that way. But it can ease the process and provide another avenue for you to make sure that they understand what you're trying to
Love
communicate about.
Yes, love that. And if all else fails, we live in a world of DoorDash and Uber Eats. So, take care of yourself. Make sure you find food, find enough food. Make sure you are paying attention to what you're eating while you're in the parks, especially if it's hot out. You want to make sure that you have enough to keep your body safe and healthy in the parks. That's my mama moment to, to end this is take care of yourself and do what you need to do to make sure you have food to eat.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all that being said, again, we hope that this was helpful. I do just want to briefly talk about next episode on Mom Street, what we're going to be doing. And ironically enough, it's more food. We are sticking with our hub episodes. We're going to be back with Duck and Jess on our next episode. And we are wrapping up, hopefully, the final episode in our Universal series, which is part 5 of our Universal is Universal Right for Me series. And we're going to be talking about food. So, Universal Food is coming your way next on our next episode of Mom Street. But until then, thank you guys so much for joining us. If you've got additional questions or need some input or have thoughts and opinions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at momstreetusa@gmail.com. You can also find us on our good friend Kirk at Walrus Carp on his Discord. We've got a Mom Street channel on there that you're welcome to post questions on there, and any of us or our lovely community can give you our input and experience on. And you can also find us at Mom Street USA on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all those good places. So please feel free to follow us on there and reach out if you've got questions. But until then, thank you for joining us, and we will catch you on the next episode of Mom Street USA. Bye, everyone.